My cruel parents forced me into an engagement, but when I discovered it was tied to an illegal deal, I refused. They slapped me hard and threatened to kick me out of the family business. However, I bravely announced the cancellation of my wedding in front of the audience and left the event. The very next morning, I returned with a secret plan for revenge that brought them to their knees. My name is Jennifer Davenport, and for most of my life, I felt like I was living in a perfectly gilded cage. On the surface, everything about my life seemed enviable. I was 28 years old, working as a data analyst at my parents' tech empire, Davenport Enterprises, in Austin, Texas. I had everything people thought they wanted: wealth, a high-profile career, and an upcoming marriage to Ethan Langston, the heir to Langston Robotics. But what most people didn't see was the price I was paying for it all. From the time I could understand words, my parents, Miranda and Jonathan Davenport, made it clear that I wasn't just their daughter. I was their legacy. My mother, a polished and ruthless socialite, constantly reminded me that my every action reflected on the Davenport name. My father, the CEO and mastermind of our sprawling tech conglomerate, treated me like one of his assets, carefully planning my every move. Together, they had built an empire, and to them, my only role was to ensure its survival. Jennifer, my father would say in his firm, no-nonsense voice, a Davenport must always think 2 steps ahead. Feelings don't build empires, strategy does. My mother would chime in with her usual advice, smile, dear. The right smile can open any door. But never let anyone see the cracks. Our mansion in Austin was as cold as their advice, beautiful but soulless. It was filled with extravagant art and state-of-the-art technology, but to me, it was more of a prison than a home. Every decision I made, from the college I attended to the job I took, was dictated by their grand plan. Even my engagement to Ethan wasn't about love. It was about securing an alliance between 2 powerful families. Ethan Langston was the textbook definition of perfect on paper. Handsome, wealthy, and intelligent, he was everything my parents wanted in a son-in-law. But to me, he was just another part of their plan, someone who spoke in boardroom jargon even over dinner. I knew he didn't care about me. He cared about the merger of our companies. And yet, I kept going through the motions because I couldn't see a way out. At least, not until I met Ryan Carter. It all started with a data breach at Davenport Enterprises. One morning, I walked into work to find the office buzzing with panic. Hackers had targeted one of our systems, and my father had hired an external cybersecurity expert to assess the damage. That's when I met Ryan. He walked into the conference room wearing a confident smile, his laptop slung over his shoulder. Unlike everyone else, who was in a state of chaos, Ryan seemed calm and collected. He introduced himself with a firm handshake and a warm, disarming tone. "Hi, I'm Ryan Carter. Let's see if we can untangle this mess, shall we?" At first, I dismissed him as just another consultant. But as the day went on, I found myself drawn to him. He had this ability to explain complex systems in a way that made them seem simple. He also had a sharp sense of humor that lightened the tension in the room. Over the course of the week, as we worked together to resolve the breach, I began to realize how different Ryan was from the people in my world. He wasn't driven by power or appearances. He was passionate about what he did, and that passion was contagious. One evening, after everyone else had left, Ryan and I ended up sitting in the break room, sharing a vending machine coffee. We talked about everything: our work, our pasts, even our dreams. When I mentioned the pressure of living up to my parents' expectations, Ryan said something that struck a chord. "Life's too short to live for someone else's version of success," he said, his brown eyes meeting mine. "You deserve to be happy, Jennifer. Not just useful." His words stayed with me. For the first time, I began to question the path I was on. I started to imagine a life where I wasn't just an extension of my parents' ambitions. A life where I could make my own choices, even if they weren't perfect. But my growing connection with Ryan didn't go unnoticed. Ethan started to question why I was spending so much time on the data breach, and my mother made pointed comments about my inappropriate friendships. My parents had always been controlling, but as the engagement party approached, their grip tightened. They were determined to see me marry Ethan, no matter what. One evening, my father called me into his study. He was sitting behind his massive oak desk, his face etched with the seriousness of a man making a business deal. "Jennifer," he said, folding his hands, "I've noticed you've been distracted lately. Let me remind you of what's at stake. This engagement isn't just about you. It's about the future of Davenport Enterprises. If you back out now, you'll lose everything: your position in the company, your financial security, and any support from this family. Is that what you want?" His words felt like a punch to the gut. I looked at him, at the man who had orchestrated every detail of my life, and for the first time, I felt something break inside me. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing: I couldn't keep living like this. As I walked out of his study, my mother stopped me in the hallway. She placed a hand on my arm, her nails digging into my skin ever so slightly. "Do you understand what you're doing, Jennifer?" she hissed. "We've sacrificed so much for you. Don't throw it all away for a foolish dream." I didn't respond. I couldn't. But in that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. I would find a way to break free, no matter the cost. The days leading up to my engagement party felt like a countdown to my own execution. My parents, Jonathan and Miranda Davenport, were relentless in their mission to ensure everything was perfect. My mother spent hours micromanaging every detail, from the floral arrangements to the guest list, while my father worked behind the scenes to solidify deals with Ethan Langston's family. I felt like a spectator in my own life, watching as they molded my future into something I wanted no part of. As the day approached, their pressure escalated. Every time I hinted at my doubts, my father's voice would harden. "Jennifer, this isn't just about you. This is about securing a legacy. Ethan is the perfect partner for you and for this family, but what about what I wanted?" The thought of marrying Ethan, a man who viewed me as nothing more than an asset, made me feel trapped. The only light in my life was Ryan Carter. After the data breach investigation wrapped up, Ryan and I had stayed in touch. He became my confidant, the one person who truly listened. We'd meet for coffee or exchange texts, and slowly, he helped me see that I deserved more than the life my parents had carved out for me. One evening, a few days before the engagement party, I met Ryan at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. I told him everything: the engagement, my parents' threats, and how suffocated I felt. I'll never forget the look in his eyes as I spoke. He didn't interrupt or try to offer quick fixes. He just listened. "You don't have to do this, Jennifer," he said softly. "You have the power to say no." "But at what cost?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They'll cut me off completely. I'll lose everything." Ryan leaned forward, his expression steady. "If everything comes at the cost of your happiness, is it really worth having?" His words lingered in my mind long after I left the diner. That night, lying in my massive but cold bedroom, I realized he was right. I'd been clinging to the illusion of security, but the truth was, I was already losing myself. I knew what I had to do, but I also knew my parents wouldn't let me go without a fight. The engagement party arrived, and I felt like I was walking into a battlefield. The Davenport mansion was buzzing with hundreds of guests, all there to witness the union of two powerful families. I wore a designer gown my mother had chosen, and as I descended the grand staircase, I felt like a puppet on strings. Ethan was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs, his smile polished but empty. "You look beautiful, Jennifer," he said, offering me his arm. I forced a smile and took it, feeling my stomach churn. All around us, guests toasted and congratulated us, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. As the evening wore on, my anxiety grew. My parents paraded me around like a prize, introducing me to business associates and old friends. "Jennifer will be an incredible partner for Ethan," my mother said to one group, her voice dripping with pride. "Their union will solidify a new era for both of our families." I couldn't take it anymore. Excusing myself, I slipped away from the crowd and into a quiet hallway. My heart was pounding as I reached for my phone and dialed Ryan's number. "I can't do this," I whispered as soon as he answered. "I'm about to walk into a life I don't want." "What do I do?" "Then don't," Ryan said firmly. "You've got this, Jennifer. Stand your ground." His words gave me the courage I needed. I hung up and returned to the main hall, my hands trembling, but my resolve solid. My parents spotted me and approached with Ethan in tow. "There you are," my father said. "The toasts are about to begin. Let's go." "No," I said, my voice louder than I expected. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at me. I took a deep breath, ignoring the knot in my stomach. "I can't do this. I'm calling off the engagement." The color drained from Ethan's face, but it was my parents who reacted with fury. My mother grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Jennifer," she hissed, dragging me into a nearby room. My father followed, slamming the door behind him. "What is wrong with you?" he barked, his face red with anger. "Do you have any idea what you're throwing away?" "I'm throwing away a life I never wanted," I shot back. "I won't marry someone I don't love, and I won't be part of your schemes anymore." My mother slapped me across the face, her eyes blazing. "You ungrateful child. We've given you everything." My father grabbed my shoulders, his grip painfully tight. "You will walk back out there and fix this, or you'll lose everything. Your job, your inheritance, your family, it'll all be gone. Is that what you want?" Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to back down. I'd rather lose everything than lose myself. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, back into the crowd of shocked guests. I stood tall, ignoring the whispers and stares. For the first time in my life, I felt free. The path ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. It would be mine to walk. Walking away from the engagement, and my parents felt like stepping off a cliff. I had no idea what would happen next, but I knew one thing. I was finally free from their control. That night, as I left the Davenport mansion, I didn't look back. I knew my parents were fuming, and the fallout would be severe. But for the first time in my life, I felt a strange sense of peace. My freedom was worth the cost. The following morning, the full extent of their wrath hit me. My father sent a message demanding I come back and fix the mess I had caused. When I refused, he acted swiftly. My access to my accounts was revoked, and my position at Davenport Enterprises was terminated. My mother called me, her voice cold and cutting. "You think you can survive without us, Jennifer? You're nothing without this family." She hung up before I could respond. Their retaliation didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, they launched a smear campaign against me. False rumors spread through the industry, painting me as unstable and untrustworthy. Ethan, humiliated by my public refusal, joined in, telling anyone who would listen that I had sabotaged the engagement for selfish reasons. I felt the walls closing in, but I refused to let them break me. Ryan was my anchor through it all. After I lost my job and my financial security, he offered me a place to stay. His small apartment in Houston was a far cry from the luxury I was used to, but it quickly became a sanctuary. I spent my days job hunting and my nights talking with Ryan about what I wanted for my future. One evening, over takeout and a bottle of cheap wine, he asked me a question that changed everything. "What if we start something together?" he said. "You're brilliant with data and analytics, and I've got the cybersecurity side covered. We could build something new, our own company, free from all the nonsense." The idea terrified me, but it also ignited a spark of hope. For years, I had worked under my parents' shadow, never feeling like my accomplishments were truly mine. This was my chance to prove to myself, and to them, that I was capable of standing on my own. With Ryan's encouragement, I agreed. Starting a business from scratch was harder than I imagined. We pooled what little resources we had to launch a small cybersecurity and analytics firm. Our first office was a tiny shared space with outdated equipment, but we made it work. Ryan handled the technical side, while I focused on building a client base. Slowly but surely, we began to gain traction. Word spread about our integrity and innovative solutions, and we started to attract clients who valued what we stood for. The work was grueling, and the obstacles seemed endless. My parents didn't make it any easier. They used their influence to try and block our progress, pressuring potential clients to stay away from us. Ethan, bitter and vengeful, spread lies about our company, calling it a desperate vanity project. But every challenge only strengthened my resolve. One day, while researching potential clients, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. Buried deep in the financial records of Davenport Enterprises were transactions that pointed to illegal activities, offshore accounts, fraudulent contracts, and under-the-table deals. My parents had been using my name to authorize some of these transactions, making me an unwitting accomplice in their schemes. I felt a surge of anger and betrayal like never before. They hadn't just tried to control my life, they had tried to ruin it. When I showed the evidence to Ryan, he was as furious as I was.
"We need to expose this," he said.
"They can't get away with it." But exposing them wouldn't be easy. My parents were powerful, and they had spent years building their empire. If I went up against them, I knew they would fight back with everything they had. Still, I couldn't let fear stop me. I had spent too long living under their thumb. It was time to take a stand, not just for myself, but for everyone they had hurt. As Ryan and I prepared to confront them, I realized something important. For the first time, I wasn't running away from my problems. I was facing them head-on. And no matter what happened, I knew I wasn't alone. Ryan stood by me every step of the way, and together, we were ready to take on whatever came next. The day I decided to expose my parents felt like the calm before a storm. Ryan and I had spent weeks compiling the evidence, bank records, fraudulent contracts, and correspondence that proved my parents had been using my name to authorize their illegal activities. The deeper we dug, the clearer it became that Davenport Enterprises wasn't just unethical, it was a house of cards built on lies. All it needed was one push to collapse. We scheduled a press conference in Houston, far from the reach of my parents' influence. The night before, I barely slept, my mind racing with thoughts of what could happen. Would the truth even matter against people as powerful as Jonathan and Miranda Davenport? Could I really stand up to them after all they had done? Ryan was my rock, calming my fears and reminding me why we were doing this. "Tomorrow," he said, holding my hand, "you take back your life. No matter what happens, you're not alone." The next morning, I stood in front of a room full of reporters, cameras flashing as I stepped up to the podium. My heart pounded as I began to speak, but I drew strength from the truth. I told them everything about the illegal transactions, the manipulation, and how my parents had used their power to silence anyone who dared to challenge them. As I laid out the evidence, the room grew quieter, the weight of my words sinking in. By the end of the press conference, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. I had done it. The truth was out in the open. Now it was up to the world to decide what to do with it. The backlash was immediate. News outlets picked up the story, and within hours, Davenport Enterprises was under federal investigation. My parents' carefully curated image began to crumble as more details of their corruption came to light. Employees stepped forward to share stories of exploitation and abuse. Even Ethan, who had stood by them during my engagement, distanced himself, publicly condemning their actions. As expected, my parents didn't go down without a fight. My father released a statement denying everything, calling me a disgruntled former employee trying to tarnish their legacy. My mother went on a televised interview, feigning heartbreak and painting me as an ungrateful daughter. But the evidence was irrefutable, and the public wasn't buying their lies anymore. A few weeks later, federal agents raided Davenport Enterprises headquarters. Seeing the footage on the news was surreal. The place where I had spent years working, where my parents had built their empire, was being torn apart. Jonathan and Miranda were arrested on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. It was over. In the aftermath, I expected to feel vindicated, but what I felt was a mixture of sadness and closure. My parents had betrayed me in ways I couldn't have imagined, but they were still my family. Despite everything, I hoped this would be a wake-up call for them, a chance to reflect and change. But I knew better than to wait for their approval. I had a new life to build. Ryan and I threw ourselves into our work, and our company flourished. The attention from the press conference brought us clients who admired our integrity and wanted to support our vision. Within a year, We had expanded to a larger office and hired a team of passionate people who shared our values. Ryan surprised me one evening by revealing that his firm had been quietly growing into a major industry competitor. He had kept it a secret, wanting me to succeed on my own terms. Together, we merged our companies, creating a tech powerhouse dedicated to ethical innovation. My parents eventually tried to reconcile. My mother wrote me a letter from prison, apologizing for the choices she had made. My father, ever the pragmatist, reached out through a lawyer, offering to rebuild a relationship in exchange for a business partnership. I set firm boundaries, telling them both that while I wished them no harm, I wouldn't let them control me ever again. As for Ethan, he disappeared from the public eye, humiliated by the fallout. I didn't spare him another thought. My focus was on the future, one I was finally building for myself. Ryan and I didn't just succeed, we thrived. We used our resources to support underprivileged communities and mentor young entrepreneurs, ensuring no one else would have to go through what I did. Our work gave me a sense of purpose I had never felt before. Looking back, I sometimes marvel at how far I've come. The girl who once lived in fear of her parents is gone. In her place is a woman who knows her worth, who fought for her freedom and won. My story isn't just about betrayal or revenge. It's about reclaiming my life. And for the first time, I can truly say I'm happy.